Our story begins with a teenage boy named Eric Ponte, who has just been expelled from school after a violent incident that left another student badly hurt. On that day, Eric beat another boy mercilessly, ignoring every plea for him to stop, while the other students could only watch as he lost all control and kept going until his victim was seriously injured. After the incident, Eric's mother, Karen, set out to save her son's future by finding him a new school. She enrolled him in an elite boarding institution called Sternsburg, a prestigious place known for its strict discipline and far removed from Eric's old surroundings. Karen hoped this fresh start would help her son leave behind his image as a troubled boy who grew up surrounded by domestic violence. But neither she nor Eric realized that the school itself was hiding a system of cruelty far darker and far more organized than anything they had known. Eric eventually traveled to the boarding school by train. Along the way, for the first time in a long while, he showed a glimpse of the ordinary teenager hidden inside him. Inside the carriage, he noticed a beautiful young woman sitting just ahead of him. With her blonde hair and neat appearance, she immediately caught his attention. Known for his good looks and rebellious aura, Eric instinctively fixed his hair and tried to draw her notice. His effort worked when she returned a small, brief smile that was enough to make him forget the pressures of his life, if only for a moment. Sadly, that moment did not last, because the train soon arrived at his destination. But the moment he stepped off the train, the young woman approached him first. With a relaxed and slightly teasing manner, she told him that his old hairstyle suited him better. She could also tell right away that he was a new student heading to the boarding school. Before walking off, she wished him good luck. Eric watched her disappear into the distance, curiosity lingering in his mind. Not long after, Eric took a taxi up to Sternsburg. The moment he arrived, the atmosphere felt entirely different. The old classical building paired with rigid discipline made the place feel more like a military institution than an ordinary school. When he met the headmaster, Eric was immediately told where he stood. The school normally did not accept transfer students in the middle of a semester, much less a student with a record of violence like his. But his mother had managed to convince the school board to give him one final chance. Even so, the headmaster explained that the teachers would not take full responsibility for student behavior. At Sternsburg, most of the discipline and supervision was handed over to a student organization led by the seniors. For that reason, whether Eric survived until graduation would depend entirely on himself. The headmaster's words sounded strange and heavy, with hidden meaning. From the look on his face, it was clear he knew something about the system inside that school, yet he chose not to say it plainly. His real nightmare was only beginning. This is Onskan. While searching for the way to his dormitory, Eric accidentally wandered into a room where the seniors were lounging. He was approached by Bernard von Schrantz, the head of the student council, who briefly reminded him about the importance of good conduct and respect toward the seniors. Bernard and the others welcomed him warmly, so Eric had no reason to suspect that they held complete power to decide on the punishment of anyone who broke their rules. As 6 in the evening drew near, every student and staff member was required to gather for a shared prayer before dinner. The tradition showed just how strong the school's religious rules were. Eric then sat at one of the large dining tables in the main hall. But before he could even adjust to his new surroundings, a young waitress arrived to deliver food to his table. That was the moment Eric realized that the girl he had met on the train actually worked at the school as kitchen staff. Her name was Maria, a young woman living within this elite world, even though her social standing was worlds apart from the wealthy students of Sternsburg. Seeing Maria again gave Eric a small spark of energy in the middle of such a tense and unfamiliar place. Unfortunately, the moment did not last. A student named Johann accidentally spilled some water on the dining table. That small mistake instantly drew the anger of Otto Silverhelm, the deputy head of the student council and the leader of the senior group. Otto was known for his great influence and was feared by nearly every student. In front of everyone, he began punishing the boy brutally.
Kom, det räcker för fan.
Stunned, Eric turned toward the teachers and the headmaster, who were eating in another room, but not one of them reacted. Everyone pretended not to see what was happening. The unfortunate student was forced to bow his head while taking slaps and humiliation in front of the entire dining hall. No one dared to step in, because every student knew the seniors held almost absolute power. Watching all of this, Eric began to sense something deeply wrong. The violence in this place was not a spontaneous outburst. It was part of a system the school itself allowed to thrive. That night, gripped by unease, Eric called his mother, and thankfully she was the one who answered. But fearing her husband might grow suspicious, Karen only confirmed that Eric was all right before quickly ending the call. She had no idea her son had just entered an environment far more dangerous than their own home. Back at the dormitory, Eric discovered he was sharing a room with a student named Pierre Tanguy. Unlike the other students who seemed arrogant, Pierre was calm, polite, and intelligent. He came from a respected family, yet carried a gentle nature and had no interest in trouble. The two of them clicked right away. Pierre even helped sew the school emblem onto Eric's uniform, something that gave Eric a warmth he rarely felt back home. But that peaceful mood was suddenly shattered when several seniors barged into their room without knocking. Claiming to act on behalf of the student organization, they conducted a room inspection in search of forbidden items. The seniors rummaged through Eric's belongings without permission, and from the way they acted, it was obvious they were deliberately targeting the new student. Soon enough, they found a cigarette under the bed. Eric immediately explained that it was not his, since he had only just arrived and had not even unpacked his things. But the seniors did not care for his explanation. Instead, they used the situation to pressure both Eric and Pierre. Since only the two of them shared the room, the seniors demanded that one of them confess. The tension rose even higher when Pierre suddenly claimed the cigarette was his, even though Eric knew very well that Pierre did not smoke. The confession startled Eric, because Pierre had deliberately protected him so the situation would not grow worse. Yet Pierre's gesture only invited mockery from the seniors. They decided Eric was too arrogant for letting his roommate take the blame. Before leaving, the seniors warned that Eric and Pierre would be summoned the next day to face a hearing of the student organization. Once the group left, Pierre only let out a quiet sigh, while Eric began to realize that life at Stjärnsburg was far darker than he had imagined. Even so, Eric chose to hold back all his anger. He remembered his promise to his mother to start a new life and to stop using violence as a way out. The scene then shifts to the past, showing a lunch that began warmly as the whole family sat together at the table. But within seconds, that calm turned into something suffocating. Mr. Ponty suddenly exploded with anger simply because his stepson, Eric, had rested his elbow on the dining table.
Vad har vi sagt? Vad har vi sagt om armbågarna på bordet? Så inskränkt att de inte ens begriper det.
Mr. Ponty was known as a temperamental man, obsessed with rules and control inside his own home. With a cold, pressing tone, he made it clear that everyone at the table had to follow his rules, and that the matter would be dealt with again once dinner was over. In the middle of that awkward tension, Eric's mother did not dare to argue, and only tried to ease the mood by talking about the wine they were drinking. Meanwhile, Mr. Ponty laughed again and acted perfectly normal, as if his outburst a few seconds earlier had never happened. But it was exactly that behavior that slowly planted a deep anger and hatred inside Eric. Later that night, Mr. Ponty intended to come to Eric's room to continue the matter from earlier. Karen, who knew her husband's temper, quickly tried to distract him in another way. She led him into their bedroom so that Eric would not hear the moment between them. In the next room, Eric, already used to situations like this, put on his headphones to block out the sounds coming from his parents' room. He only wanted to sleep in peace and forget the terrible day he had just lived through. But sometime later, his stepfather forced his way into Eric's room anyway, waking him while he was still in his school clothes. The conversation at dinner had apparently not been considered finished. The moment his stepfather slipped the belt from his trousers, Eric understood exactly what was coming. This was clearly not the first time he had endured such violence, because Eric no longer even tried to beg for mercy. The boy simply lowered his head in resignation and absorbed blow after blow. In another room, Eric's mother could only weep in silence. She had neither the strength nor the courage to stand against her husband, even knowing her son was being beaten. After his anger was satisfied, Mr. Ponty returned to the manipulative behavior that had become so familiar. With a warm, casual tone, he treated what had just happened as if it were an ordinary part of a relationship between father and son. Back in the present, during a class lesson, Eric once again watched Otto Silverhelm torment the same student from the night before. The sight opened his eyes even further to the truth that surviving and finishing his education at Stjärnsburg would be no easy thing. In this school, violence was no longer a violation. It had become a system buried deep in the roots. Pierre then explained to Eric that some time ago, a parent had once reported a case of bullying to the headmaster. But instead of investigating it himself, the headmaster handed the matter right back to the student organization. From that point on, the seniors felt they held complete power to decide the punishment of anyone they judged to have broken their rules. When lunchtime came, another act of oppression unfolded. Leffler, a student from a noble family, began harassing one of the waitresses serving the food. The young woman could only endure the discomfort without daring to resist, because every student in the school came from prominent, powerful families. But that improper act was witnessed from a distance by Maria. Pretending to carry a bowl of soup, Maria deliberately collided with Leffler so the hot broth spilled across his clothes. She then acted panicked while wiping him down. Her stunt only drew laughter from the other students watching, while Leffler seethed with humiliation. Maria's deliberate humiliation of that student did succeed in defending her co-worker, but it also drew the anger of Bridget, the head of the kitchen and her superior. The incident once again revealed how the strange rules of Stjernsberg worked. Not even the head of the kitchen, nor the headmaster himself, had any authority to interfere with the students. Every violation and every punishment was left entirely to the student organization led by the seniors. The system had gone on for years, allowed to continue by the school without interference. Soon after, Otto threw a pair of gloves down in front of Johan, a symbol of challenge and punishment all at once. The tradition had become a custom at Stjernsberg, and anyone who received the challenge was obligated to follow through. The punishment arena sat on a slab of concrete on the sports field. There, the two sides had to fight each other in front of the rest of the students. The rules looked like a fair duel, but in reality it was nothing more than a tool for humiliation. The loser was forced to crawl out of the arena like a rat while begging the winner for mercy. The seniors and other students surrounded the arena, cheering, turning the punishment into entertainment. Johan, who was much smaller, stood no chance against Otto and was forced to take blow after blow, while the other students kept shouting for the fight to drag on. No one tried to stop the cruelty. From the edge of the field, Eric watched it all with a tense expression. He could not understand why something so brutal was treated as a normal tradition. The students even cheered for the bully, as though humiliating and intimidating someone else was something to celebrate. The sight stirred up the dark memories he had long tried to bury. The violence Johan suffered reminded him of the torment he had endured for years at the hands of his stepfather. Eric could not bear to keep watching and chose to leave the field before his emotions truly erupted. But the arrogant faces of the seniors kept replaying in his mind. His blood boiled, and the urge to fight back grew harder to hold down. Even so, Eric kept reminding himself of his promise to his mother that he would start a new life and finish school without returning to violence. And so he forced himself to stay calm and refused to be provoked. The next day, after class, Eric went to the school's swimming pool. Swimming was the sport he mastered best. At his old school, he had been a star athlete who brought home victory after victory in various championships. For that reason, Eric hoped to join the Stjernsberg swim team. But only moments after arriving, Otto and his group of seniors came up to him. With a mocking tone, Otto told him that the pool was no place for a new student like him. Eric explained that he only wanted to sign up for the swim team. Otto immediately refused, claiming new students were not allowed to use the facility, even though Eric knew that rule had never appeared in the school's official regulations. Eric began to realize the ban was nothing more than a rule the seniors invented to maintain their power. Though he felt the unfairness of it, he chose to back down. To avoid trouble, Eric left the pool without putting up a fight. But his decision to retreat did not satisfy Otto. From that point on, Otto only grew more resentful toward the new student. After Eric left, Otto and several members of the student organization gathered in the sauna. They agreed that it was time to teach Eric a lesson because he was beginning to defy the unwritten rules they had created. Meanwhile, Eric spent his time in the school library where he ran into Maria again. After crossing paths several times, the two began to feel more at ease with each other. When they both reached for the same book on the same shelf, their hands accidentally touched. That brief moment left them both feeling nervous. Through their conversation, Eric finally learned the truth about Maria's life. Coming from a poor family, Maria had no money to continue her education. She worked as a kitchen servant at Stjernsberg while using her free time to study on her own, because she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Each day, Maria had only a very limited window to read in the library. After that, the book had to be returned because she had to get back to work. During that short time, she always copied the contents into her notes so she could study them again whenever she had a spare moment. After learning about her situation, Eric decided to help her. Using his rights as a student, he borrowed a thick veterinary textbook so Maria could study it for much longer. That simple gesture brought the two of them even closer. While in the library, Eric's attention also fell on the school notice board. There he saw an announcement about a dance party being held that very night. The idea of inviting Maria to the event immediately crossed his mind. But before he could think the plan through, a student approached him. The boy delivered a message that Otto wanted Eric to come to the sports field because there was something important to discuss. Eric understood at once what the invitation really meant. He knew Otto had no intention of talking peacefully, but was instead looking for a chance to humiliate or punish him. Showing no fear, Eric changed into more comfortable sportswear and walked toward the field. Along the way, he happened to meet Berg, a physical education teacher out walking his dog. Since Eric also had a dog at home, the two quickly found common ground and the mood lightened. Berg, as it turned out, knew of Eric's achievements in swimming and said he wanted to recruit him to the school swim team. But Eric explained that a senior had forbidden new students from joining. Before Berg could respond, Otto Silverhelm and his group were seen walking toward them, a sign that the real confrontation was about to begin. Berg seemed to understand the situation Eric was facing, but before leaving, he again suggested that Eric consider joining the swim team, because Berg believed Eric's talent would be a valuable asset to Sharonsburg. Not long after the teacher left, Otto approached Eric and handed him a shovel. With little explanation, Otto led him to an empty plot of land on the school grounds and said a small storage pit would be built there, ordering Eric to dig a hole to a set of specified measurements. Otto never explained the real purpose of the task. He only ordered Eric to keep digging until it was finished. Realizing that refusing would only give the seniors more reasons to punish him, Eric chose to obey. Meanwhile, in the servants' dormitory, all the girls were busy preparing for the school dance being held that night. For them, the party was more than just entertainment. Many of the servants hoped to meet the sons of the wealthy families who studied at Sharonsburg, since such a connection might change their fortunes in the future. Among all of them, only Marya seemed uninterested in attending, because to her, studying mattered far more than seeking the attention of the students. But when she returned to her room, Marya was surprised to find a package left on her balcony. When she opened it, she discovered the veterinary textbook she had long wanted to read. Before she could even understand what was happening, her co-worker Tina arrived to tell her that the book had been sent by Eric and that an invitation to the dance was tucked inside. Marya, who was actually 3 years older than Eric, could not hide her happiness. In the end, Marya dressed up like the other servants. She stood before the mirror, fixing her hair and her appearance, looking forward to a night that might mark the beginning of something closer with Eric. Sadly, at that very same moment, Eric was enduring a suffering she could never have imagined. From midday until night, Eric was forced to keep digging a large hole all on his own. With every ounce of strength he had, he finally managed to dig the pit as deep as Otto had demanded. His exhausted body left him asleep beside the hole, with no chance to return to the dormitory. In his sleep, Eric was haunted once again by nightmares of his past. The memory carried him back to a time when he was still the finest swimmer at his old school. Eric had been the pride of the swim team, breaking records again and again and becoming his coach's favorite student. His future as an athlete had looked so bright, yet none of that pride ever meant anything in the eyes of his stepfather. One day, simply because Eric came home a few minutes late after swim practice, his stepfather treated it as an act of defiance. With a cold voice, Mr. Ponte said they would discuss the matter that night, and Eric already understood exactly what those words meant. That night, as usual, Eric received another cruel punishment. The walls covered in symbols of victory became silent witnesses to the torment he kept suffering. In the living room, his mother once again could do nothing. To cover the sounds of the whipping and her son's cries, Karen could only play the piano with trembling hands. The music was not meant to comfort. It was her last way of hiding Eric's suffering from the outside world. After finishing the punishment, his stepfather returned to acting as if nothing had happened. Mr. Ponte uttered a few flat, brief words before leaving the room, while Eric's body was left covered in bruises and deep welts. The dream reminded Eric that he had escaped one hell at home, only to become trapped in another, the hell that was Sharonsburg. When Eric woke, the members of the student organization came to inspect his work. After confirming the hole had been fully dug, they gave him a new order. They told him to fill the entire pit back in, claiming they were worried someone might fall in during the night. Hearing this, Eric could only stare at Otto, filled with rage. For a brief moment, the thought of striking Otto with the shovel and dropping him into the very hole he had just dug crossed his mind. But Eric quickly let go of the idea, because he knew that one reckless act would destroy his future and turn all his mother's sacrifices into nothing. With great difficulty, Eric shoveled the soil back, bit by bit, to fill the hole he had only just finished digging. He was forced to do the same labor twice, all for the amusement of the seniors. Meanwhile, Marya had come to the dance as invited. She waited for Eric for a long time, but he never appeared. Not knowing what had truly happened, Marya began to think Eric had deliberately toyed with her. All night, she turned down every invitation to dance from the other students, and in the end, she left the party alone, disappointed and hurt. As for Eric, he only managed to fill the hole back in late into the night. His body was utterly spent, but the experience made him start to think that facing Otto with violence was not the only way. If he could not strike directly, perhaps there was still another way to fight the system the seniors had built. The next day during lunch, Bernard walked around the dining hall to keep an eye on the new students. When Bernard approached him, Eric deliberately spoke loudly enough for others to hear, describing how he had been forced to spend the entire weekend digging and filling a hole for no clear reason. Eric knew full well that Otto was the one who had ordered it, and he intentionally revealed the whole ordeal in front of many students to humiliate Otto and provoke his temper. The provocation worked. His face filling with anger, Otto grabbed a metal spoon from the table and struck Eric on the head as a form of public humiliation. But a moment later, Otto suddenly stopped. His cold stare made it clear he had thought of a far crueler way to humiliate Eric. Otto refused to let Eric off so easily and picked up a sharp glass bottle cap from the table. At first, he only meant to frighten Eric, but he had underestimated the new student's mental resolve because Eric showed no fear at all. He simply stared at Otto with a flat expression, as though the wound he received was nothing that could shake him. Eric stayed calm without changing his expression in the slightest. Yet a moment later, blood began to flow from his head, where Otto had struck him. Maria, who saw what happened, immediately showed a worried face and tried to help him. Thankfully, Berg arrived quickly after hearing the commotion. Seeing the wound on Eric's head, he took the boy to the infirmary for treatment. Berg knew very well who Otto Silverhelm and his seniors were, and he understood that they were the main source of violence in the school. While treating Eric, Berg advised him not to keep provoking hostility with Otto's group because it would only make the situation more dangerous. Eric did not offer much of an explanation, but when Berg saw the old scars covering Eric's back during the treatment, he began to understand that Eric had endured something far more horrifying before arriving at Stjarnsberg. The scars were silent proof of years of torment at the hands of his stepfather. After the treatment was over, Eric chose to be alone near the sports field. Although the incident had brought him new trouble, it also, without him realizing it, drew him and Maria closer together. Maria felt deep pity seeing Eric's condition, because in her eyes he was different from the other students. Eric was able to restrain himself and refused to answer violence with violence, even after being treated so unjustly. It was that quality that slowly turned Maria's feelings into love. For his part, Eric began to feel the same way about Maria. Her warmth and care became the only comfort in the middle of the harsh life he was living. From then on, the two of them began meeting in secret in a small forest not far from the school grounds. Their bond grew closer, and slowly they began to hold genuine affection for each other. But that happiness did not last long. Otto had still not forgotten the humiliation he felt in the dining hall. Even though he had managed to wound Eric, Otto knew that mentally he was the one who had lost. Otto decided to use the cruelest rules Stjarnsberg had to offer. Meanwhile, Eric returned to the dormitory after meeting Maria, his heart light with happiness. But the moment he stepped into the dormitory corridor, he sensed something very different. The students looked at him with strange eyes. No one spoke, yet the entire hallway was thick with tension. When he reached his room, Eric found a pair of gloves placed on his bed. At Stjarnsberg, that object was the official symbol of a duel challenge. Otto had challenged him to a fight in keeping with the school tradition known as a ritual of humiliation. Facing the challenge, Pierre tried to remind Eric to remain a good person. To Pierre, kindness was the one thing Eric still had in an environment full of hatred and violence. He did not want to see Eric lose himself just by playing into the seniors' game. The day of the fight arrived. That night, on the concrete field that had long served as the arena of punishment, dozens of students gathered around. Most of them stood behind Otto, while only a few hoped Eric could hold his own. Eric stepped into the arena with one resolve. He wanted to keep his promise to his mother to no longer live by violence, and he wanted to honor the hope he had given Maria that he could become a better person. When Otto began throwing punch after punch, Eric only defended himself without striking back. His body kept absorbing the heavy blows, yet he fought to control his emotions. Each time his anger nearly burst, the faces of his mother and Maria returned to his mind. In the middle of that fight, Eric's memories drifted back to his past once more. Before coming to Stjarnsberg, Eric had spent time with a group of street kids in his neighborhood. Together, they formed a small gang that had been involved in several crimes, from fights to planning a robbery at a music shop. His friends only wanted to sell what they stole for money, but unlike them, Eric truly loved music. From that robbery, Eric kept an Elvis Presley album for himself because he admired the legendary singer. In those days, his family life had actually seemed more peaceful. His mother worked as a piano teacher, giving lessons to children at home. Though they lived simply, they still held on to a little happiness. But everything changed when his stepfather began to show his true nature. One day, Eric's stepfather had to work overtime at the upscale restaurant where he was employed. His mother then asked Eric to bring an item his stepfather had left behind. Although Mr. Ponte was only an ordinary waiter, he always carried himself as if he held a high position. He even gave Eric a company drink to look generous in front of the other workers. But by accident, Mr. Ponte bumped into one of his co-workers and knocked over a tray of tableware the man was carrying. The sound of everything crashing and shattering instantly drew the attention of the head waiter, who actually held authority in that place. When the head waiter came over and asked who was responsible, Eric's stepfather refused to admit his mistake. Without hesitation, Mr. Ponte pointed at Eric as the cause of it all, once again making his stepson the scapegoat to save his own pride in front of others. Eric quickly explained that they had not meant to drop the tableware, and after hearing this, the head waiter realized that Eric was Mr. Ponte's stepson. The head waiter warned all the staff to be more careful at work, then told them to get back to it. Although the matter ended there, his stepfather's pride had already been shattered. As Eric was about to leave the restaurant, he caught a glimpse through the window of his stepfather being harshly scolded by the head waiter. In that instant, Eric knew the incident would surely lead to something terrible once they got home, and that bad feeling proved correct. That night, the moment Eric returned home, he saw his mother's face filled with worry, unable even to look at him. From her expression alone, Eric already knew his stepfather was waiting for him. Sure enough, Mr. Ponte sat in the living room, holding back his rage. In his mind, Eric's arrival at his workplace had humiliated him in front of his boss and all his co-workers, and all of that shame was now dumped onto Eric. Mr. Ponte warned him never to come to his workplace again without permission, and Eric could only apologize in a quiet voice, admitting his mistake. But that apology did nothing to satisfy the man. He instead insulted Eric as weak and foolish for not daring to say that it was his mother who had sent him to the workplace. To Mr. Ponte, Eric was a disgrace to the family, and he kept hurling those insults. He blamed Eric's clothes for looking like a vagrant, accused him of carelessness for the accident at work, and claimed that all the humiliation he suffered came from his stepson. Whip after whip struck his body without mercy. Eric's cries of pain echoed through the room, while his stepfather kept beating him without the slightest pity. In the next room, Karen could only weep in silence. Although it broke her heart to see her son tormented again, she still lacked the courage to stop her husband. Fear left her able only to listen, doing nothing. After he had satisfied his rage, Eric's stepfather once again showed the manipulative side that always surfaced after his violence. With a tone that seemed full of warmth, he asked whether the two of them were still friends as usual. Eric, his body covered in wounds, could only answer faintly that, yes, they were still friends. Hearing this, his stepfather wished him good night and left the room as if he had never inflicted any torment at all. In the midst of pain that never seemed to end, the only creature able to give Eric a little peace was his dog, Remus. The animal always stayed close to Eric after every beating, a loyal companion that never judged or hurt him. Meanwhile, Eric's mother lived in the same suffering. She carried the weight of guilt every day, yet she could never change the state of her family. Sometime later, one of Eric's friends from the street gang was caught by the police for a theft. To lighten his own sentence, the boy confessed to all the crimes they had committed together, including the robbery at the music shop. Although Eric was not immediately arrested, the news reached his school, and he was called in to see the headmaster. On the desk sat several cassettes and records stolen by Eric's gang, and the sight left Eric unable to say a word. The headmaster accused him of stealing other people's property and selling it for profit. Eric tried to explain that he had taken part in the theft, but he had never been involved in selling the stolen goods, and that he had only kept one music album because he truly loved its contents. But the headmaster no longer wanted to hear Eric's defense, because to him, no excuse would erase the fact that Eric had been involved in a crime. The headmaster then questioned how a 16-year-old boy could form a group that controlled its own territory like a criminal organization. Eric only stayed silent before finally asking where the headmaster had learned all of this. Despite his bad record, the headmaster actually knew that Eric was not a stupid student. His academic grades were good, and for years he had been the school's best swimmer. Thanks to his achievements, Eric had led his school to championship titles in various swimming competitions. Sadly, all of that potential slowly crumbled because of the violent life he kept enduring at home and in his surroundings. Both his swimming coach and his old headmaster still saw great hope in him. They knew that behind his record of misbehavior, Eric had strong academic ability and an extraordinary gift for swimming. For that reason, even though he had been involved in theft and in running with a street gang, They decided to give him one final chance to return to the right path. Eric himself had actually already intended to leave his old life behind. But before he could truly change, his stepfather first learned of the entire theft case and Eric's involvement with the gang. To Mr. Ponte, all of it was simply proof that Eric had once again shamed the family name. That night, his stepfather decided to give a punishment he believed would make Eric never forget his mistake. At the time, Eric's mother was not home. Realizing there was no one to serve as a witness, his stepfather ordered Eric to take off his shirt, and Eric knew the punishment this time would be far crueler than usual. For years, Eric had always accepted every punishment without saying much. But this time, all the anger he had bottled up finally erupted. With a trembling voice, Eric told his stepfather he could beat him as much as he wanted, admitting that he truly deserved to be seen as a disgrace to the family. Eric even invited his stepfather to unleash all his hatred onto him, and for a moment, he thought those words would make the man stop. But what happened instead was far more horrifying. Without a single word, his stepfather walked out of the house dragging Remus, Eric's beloved dog, with a hunting rifle already gripped in his hand. Eric did not understand what was happening, and in a panic he kept following, asking where they were going. His unease only grew, and he quickly put his clothes back on and ran after them. His stepfather led Remus toward a deserted park, and there his true intent began to show. Mr. Ponte planned to kill the only friend Eric had as a form of punishment and a release for his rage. For the first time, Eric truly lost all his pride. He begged endlessly for his stepfather to abandon the idea. Eric even said he was willing to respect him as a father and obey his every wish, as long as Remus was spared. Mr. Ponte only smiled with satisfaction. To him, things became far better the moment Eric finally submitted. As usual, he asked the manipulative question he always posed after tormenting Eric. He asked whether they were still friends. But this time, Eric's answer was different. Before he could do anything, a gunshot shattered the silence of the park. Eric could only scream his beloved dog's name as he held Remus's lifeless body, weeping uncontrollably. For the first time, Eric no longer answered his stepfather's question about whether they were still friends. Shortly afterward, when he saw the former friend who had reported all their crimes to the police standing in front of the school gate, Eric's emotions exploded. In his mind, that boy's betrayal was the source of all the suffering that had fallen upon him. Without caring for any explanation, Eric began beating his former friend relentlessly. Blow after blow landed on the boy's face until the people around them had to step in to stop the brutal assault. It was that dark memory that filled Eric's mind once more, as he stood in the Stjernsburg dueling arena, facing Otto. All this time, Eric had held himself back from using violence. But all the wounds of his past, the torment from his stepfather, the death of Remus, and the betrayals of those around him came flooding back before him. Otto, on the other hand, cared nothing for any of it, because his only goal was to force Eric to admit his defeat in front of the entire school. After beating Eric until his body nearly collapsed, Otto stepped closer and, with an arrogant tone, declared that from then on, Eric belonged to him. Otto also warned him never again to humiliate the student organization in front of everyone. Just when everyone thought Eric had finally surrendered, Otto reached out a hand to help him up. With a triumphant smile, Otto spoke the line he always used after humiliating his victims. He asked whether they were now still friends. But that simple sentence became the trigger that shattered the last of Eric's restraint. Those words were exactly the same as the ones his stepfather always said after tormenting him at home. Eric stared at Otto coldly and gave him one final warning, telling him he still had the chance to leave the arena that very instant. But if he chose to keep fighting, Eric would no longer hold back. In a calm but threatening voice, Eric described exactly what he would do. He would break Otto's nose, then shatter several of his ribs, then destroy his left eye socket. He would deliberately spare Otto's right eye so the boy could still see his own face in the mirror and be reminded of his defeat every single day. Eric then told Otto to make his own choice, leave or keep fighting. For the first time since taking control of Stjernsburg, Otto truly fell silent. Never before had a single student dared to speak to him in such a way, but his pride made it impossible for Otto to back down in front of the entire school. The fight resumed, and the cheers of the students filled the arena at once. Some shouted for Eric to rise, while others began to panic at the fury showing on his face. A few students even begged Eric to stop his attack, fearing Otto might truly die. Others warned that what was happening had gone beyond the rules of the school's duel, while some began to wonder why no one was stepping in to end the fight. But everyone knew the truth. The tradition of the duel on the concrete field was an unwritten rule at Stjernsburg. No teacher or student dared to interfere once a fight was underway. In the middle of the brawl, Eric caught sight of Maria standing among the crowd. Their eyes met for a moment, but seconds later Maria chose to leave the arena, and Eric understood why. He had once promised her he would no longer settle his problems with violence, but circumstances forced him to break that promise. And now Eric felt he had no other choice but to fight. At the same time, the head nurse on duty came to check on Otto and looked shocked at the sight of his battered face. Without wasting time, the school called a taxi to take Otto to the nearest hospital for more intensive care. As for Eric, his condition was far better. He had many bruises and only a torn wound at the corner of his eye. But overall, he was in much more stable shape than Otto. The incident soon shook all of Stjernsburg, and not long after, the headmaster and the teachers held a meeting to decide Eric's fate. Some of the teachers argued that keeping Eric from the start had been a mistake. They pointed out that Eric already had a history of violence before being accepted, and so this incident was seen as proof that he did not belong at the school. Those words were really aimed at the headmaster, since he had been the one who insisted on giving Eric a second chance. But not all the teachers agreed. Some of them, including Berg, reminded the others that Eric was a gifted swimmer with the potential to bring honor to the school in various competitions. On top of that, the duel on the concrete field was an official tradition the school had long allowed to continue. If Eric was to be punished for fighting, then Otto and the entire system that permitted the tradition should also be held accountable. The debate left the decision about Eric's fate unresolved. While the meeting continued, Eric chose to prepare for the worst. He began packing all his belongings in the dormitory room, convinced he would soon be expelled from Stjernsburg. At the same time, Pierre entered the room and seemed not to understand why Eric had given up before any official decision was even announced. Pierre reminded him that the duel on the concrete field was part of the school's tradition. If Eric was to be punished, Otto should receive the same punishment, and so Pierre urged Eric not to lose hope so quickly. Although his friend's words made sense, Eric still felt his chances of staying were very slim. A short while later, Eric went to a public phone, intending to call his mother and tell her everything that had happened during his time at Stjernsburg. But when the call connected, the voice on the other end was not his mother's. It was his stepfather. Eric immediately fell silent, unable to utter a single word. But that silence alone was enough for his stepfather to recognize that the person on the line was Eric. A moment after Eric hung up the phone, several members of the student organization who served under Otto came up to him. They surrounded Eric and hurled threats because he had dared to humiliate Otto. They told him that from that day on, his life would never be at peace, because wherever he went, they would make sure there was no place truly safe for him. The situation nearly turned into a beating before it was stopped by Bernard, and using the excuse that class was about to begin and anyone late could be summoned to a hearing of the student organization, they finally dispersed. For the time being, Eric managed to escape the threat. Even so, Eric himself understood that if those seniors truly attacked him all at once, the outcome might not turn out the way they expected. After all the anger he had bottled up finally erupted when facing Otto, Eric's fighting ability could no longer be underestimated. Once things had calmed down, Eric decided to find Maria to apologize. He deeply regretted what had happened on the concrete field and hoped she would understand his reasons. But reality proved otherwise. Maria admitted she was deeply disappointed in Eric. To her, no matter the reason, using violence was never the answer, because she believed there was always another way to face a problem without destroying someone else. Eric tried to explain that he truly had no choice, and asked how anyone could simply stay silent while being beaten and humiliated again and again. To Eric, sometimes a single act of resistance was needed so that the same suffering would not keep repeating. If he only kept restraining himself, the aggressor would only grow bolder in oppressing his victim. But Maria still could not accept that reasoning, and the difference in their outlook began to drive a wedge between them. The next morning, the headmaster stood in front of the main building to welcome an important guest, none other than Otto's father, Mr. Silverhelm, a wealthy nobleman and a member of the school's board with great influence over Stjernsburg. He had come to discuss the duel that left his son seriously injured. In the meeting, the headmaster explained the tentative decision the teachers had reached, that Eric should indeed be expelled for again being involved in violence. But at the same time, Otto could not be freed of responsibility either, because he was the one who started the duel and had long led the various acts of bullying at the school. For that reason, if Eric received punishment, Otto should receive an equal penalty. Unexpectedly, Otto's father did not object to the decision. In fact, he stated that, in his view, no act of violence had ever taken place. He said he would speak with the school board so the case would not be blown out of proportion and would not need to be investigated any further. The headmaster found this strange, struggling to understand why a father whose son had been beaten nearly senseless would try to cover the matter up. He could only guess that the Silverhelm family had its own reasons for protecting the family name and the boy's future. Without Eric realizing it, that decision was exactly what saved his place at Stjernsburg. Sometime later, the headmaster summoned Eric and informed him that, according to the official report, Otto's injuries had been declared the result of falling from a horse, not a fight with Eric. As a result, the school decided not to expel him. Even so, the headmaster gave a stern warning that nothing like this could ever happen again, and that if Eric was involved in violence once more, there would be no second chance. Hearing the decision, Eric could finally manage a small, relieved smile, believing that justice had at last sided with him. In reality, all of it was part of Otto's plan. By covering up the cause of his injuries, Otto made sure Eric stayed at Stjernsburg so he could continue his revenge later on. A few days afterward, Eric called home again to speak with his mother, hoping to tell her everything he had been through since living at the boarding school. This time, his mother answered. But from the very start of the conversation, Eric sensed something was wrong, because her voice sounded so weak and full of sorrow. In a quiet voice, Karen asked Eric to stop calling home for a while, but she never explained the real reason. The conversation ended with a hollow feeling because Eric could do nothing but keep worrying about her. When lunchtime came, Eric's standing in the eyes of the students began to shift. His courage in standing up to Otto Silverhelm gave many of the longtime victims of bullying a glimmer of hope. Some of them quietly began to support Eric. The dining hall, usually filled with fear, slowly changed until whispers and calls to stop the oppression could be heard. But that hope did not last long, because soon Otto reappeared, and his presence turned the dining hall, which had only just grown lively, completely silent. No one dared to speak again. As usual, the students first carried out the prayer before the meal in keeping with school tradition. But the moment the prayer ended, Otto stood and announced a new decision from the school board. Bernard, the previous head of the student organization, had been officially dismissed, and from that point on, Otto himself took over as head of the student organization. The news was an immediate bad omen for Eric, because now the person who hated him most held complete power over the lives of every student at Stjernsburg. Even so, Otto did not strike at Eric directly. Instead, he chose to destroy the people around him first. Otto called a student named Milton to the front, then brought up the cigarette incident once again, the one found under the bed in Eric's room. After that, Otto called Pierre forward and accused him of being the cigarette's owner. As punishment, Otto ordered Milton to strike Pierre's head with the same sharp glass bottle cap he had once used to strike Eric. The order was carried out at once by Milton, who was truly terrified of Otto. The bottle cap struck Pierre's head until blood flowed freely.
Du sätter dig ner.
Va? Ville du dräpa honom?
Rather than stopping the violence, Otto instead mocked Milton, saying he had nearly killed Pierre, or even cracked open his skull. Several students then carried Pierre to the infirmary for help. Seeing this, the other students who had begun to find the courage to defy Otto once again chose to stay silent, because everyone understood that Otto was demonstrating his power, and the real target was not Pierre, but Eric. Elsewhere, Carine's life grew more miserable as well, because every day she continued to be a victim of her husband's violence. The smallest mistake could end in beatings and torment, and there was no one able to help her escape that life full of suffering. Meanwhile, back at the Stjernsburg dormitory, Otto continued his revenge. In the name of the student organization, he and several seniors entered Eric and Pierre's room without permission. They tore the room apart, throwing belongings to the floor, breaking various personal items, and ransacking the entire wardrobe. Otto wanted to make Eric suffer by tormenting everyone close to him, and anyone who befriended Eric would become a target of the bullying. A few days later, the school held its annual sports event, and Otto once again used the chance to carry out his revenge, this time with his friend Rasmus, who quietly summoned Pierre and forced him to betray Eric. Rasmus ordered Pierre to make sure Eric did not compete. If Eric appeared at the starting line, Pierre himself would face the punishment. Pierre pretended to agree, but deep down he had no intention of betraying his friend. Sure enough, when the competition began, Eric stood at the starting line as a participant. Seeing this, Otto immediately realized Pierre had not carried out his order. His face twisted with fury because his plan for revenge had failed once again. Soon after, the relay race began. But during the baton exchange, a mistake occurred. The baton meant for Eric fell to the track instead. For most athletes, a mistake like that would almost certainly end any chance of winning. But Eric was no ordinary athlete. Since childhood, he had been known as a gifted swimmer with physical ability far above average. He ran as fast as he could to chase down the runners ahead of him. Seeing Eric almost overtake every competitor, The teachers and students rose to their feet, applauding. As a result, even after closing a massive gap following the drop baton, Eric finished only in second place. Even so, the physical education teacher praised him to the skies. To him, Eric's performance was extraordinary. Pierre, however, realized that Eric had deliberately eased off near the finish line. As soon as the race ended, Pierre approached him in the locker room. With a disappointed tone, he questioned why Eric had deliberately held back. Eric finally admitted his reason, saying he did not want to become the center of attention again. After all the trouble with Otto, Eric only wanted to finish his education in peace. He did not want to keep provoking the student organization by showing off his abilities. But Pierre completely disagreed, because to him, Otto would never stop tormenting Eric, win or lose. On top of that, Otto had been thoroughly humiliated in the duel on the concrete field. A wound to his pride that deep could not simply be ignored. For that reason, Pierre hoped Eric would stop holding back and show his very best in the upcoming swimming competition. Meanwhile, Otto seemed unable to wait to take his revenge. At first, he did not know Eric was taking part in the swimming competition, because Eric's name was not on the list of participants. But moments before the race began, Otto saw Eric already standing at the edge of the pool as one of the competitors, and that instantly enraged him. Just minutes before the race, Otto forced the organizers to replace one of the competitors so he could enter and face Eric himself. Berg actually tried to stop it, but unfortunately no one dared to oppose Otto, including him. The moment the whistle blew, every swimmer leaped into the pool, and the race was fierce from the very start. But swimming was Eric's world. Ever since his old school, Eric had been known as a gifted athlete who had brought home championship titles and broken numerous records. No one could match his speed, and when he touched the finish wall, Eric emerged as the champion by a convincing margin. That victory did not just earn Eric a medal. It also broke a Stjärnsberg swimming record that had stood for years. The whole stand erupted in applause from the teachers and students, and Berg looked immensely proud of Eric's achievement. Otto, on the other hand, had to swallow his humiliation in front of the entire school for being beaten by Eric once again, and this time in a sport watched by so many. Otto approached Eric and delivered a cold threat, saying that this victory would come at a steep price. The words left Eric confused, and he instinctively turned toward the stands to look for Pierre, who had been there earlier to celebrate his win. A moment later, Eric climbed onto the podium to receive his medal, then posed for a photo with the headmaster while savoring a victory that marked a turning point after so long living under pressure and humiliation. But behind that smile, Eric noticed that several members of the student organization had quietly left the arena alongside Otto, and at the same time, he realized Pierre was nowhere to be seen. In a panic, Eric rushed toward the school infirmary, and his fear proved correct. Pierre was there, injured, the latest victim of Otto's hatred toward Eric. Pierre had become a victim not because of any fault of his own, but because of Otto's hatred toward Eric. The only friend Eric had at Stjärnsberg had to endure suffering simply for choosing to stand by his side. Guilt and rage began to fill Eric's heart, but at the same moment the school nurse came to tend to Pierre. Because the infirmary needed to be used for medical care right away, Eric was asked to step outside first. Soon after, Maria approached Eric and praised his performance in the swimming competition. To her, Eric was an extraordinary swimmer who deserved to be the pride of the school. But the praise did nothing to erase the guilt that kept haunting his mind. Caught between victory and regret, Eric once again tried to reach his mother by public phone, wanting to tell her everything that had happened. Unfortunately, the one who answered was once again his stepfather. Mr. Ponti quickly recognized Eric's voice and claimed he did not know where Eric's mother was, but he also hinted that if all the trouble unfolding was connected to Eric, then the two of them would surely meet again someday. This time, Eric no longer spoke like a frightened child and firmly told his stepfather that they would never meet again. Eric also stated that all this time, he had been wrong to keep feeling ashamed of himself. Because it was his stepfather who should be the one feeling ashamed of everything he had done, the words instantly angered his stepfather, who demanded to know just who Eric thought he was to speak that way. Eric replied that he truly did not know what kind of person he would become in the future. But there was one thing he was utterly certain of, that he would never grow up to be a man like his stepfather. Meanwhile, Karen could no longer bear to remain in that violent marriage. She chose to leave the house, which left Mr. Ponti without control over his family. For the first time, the man who had always held power began to feel the consequences of his own cruelty. Sometime later, Eric returned to his dormitory room and found a letter resting on his bed. It had been written by Pierre. No longer able to endure the relentless bullying, Pierre had decided to withdraw from Stjarnsberg and leave the school quietly. Reading the letter made Eric truly lose his patience while blaming himself. Carrying Pierre's farewell letter, Eric walked straight to the headquarters of the student organization, and without knocking, he burst into the room. The seniors looked at him with mockery, then asked whether Eric had lost his mind or simply never understood the rules of Stjarnsberg. But Eric paid no attention to their jeers. Filled with anger, Eric called every member of the student organization a pack of cowards who only dared to torment the weak. Eric then removed his watch and jacket, a gesture that showed he was ready to break every school rule and challenge the student organization once more, even if the consequence was expulsion from Stjarnsberg. When Eric's attention was diverted, Otto suddenly attacked him from behind, and the heavy blow knocked Eric unconscious. When he opened his eyes, Eric realized he was on a grassy field far from the school building. His hands and feet were tied tightly so he could not move at all. This time, Eric had truly become Otto's prisoner. But the torment Otto had planned was only just beginning. Otto gathered the students from humble families, including Milton, who had long been victims of the student organization's oppression, and each of them was forced to carry a bucket of water. Under Otto's threats, they were ordered to torture Eric. First, his body was doused with scalding water, and a moment later, freezing cold water was poured over him. The torment was repeated again and again. Hot water and cold water were poured alternately to make Eric's body suffer agony. Most of the students forced to do it actually had a good relationship with Eric and did not want to hurt him. But no one dared to refuse Otto's order. As head of the student organization with absolute power, Otto could destroy the future of anyone who opposed him. The torment went on for nearly a full hour, and bound as he was, Eric could only struggle to endure the pain. His body began to shiver, his breathing grew weaker, and his strength slowly drained away. After he was satisfied, Otto ordered all the students back to the school building, as though nothing had ever happened. At the same time, Maria saw Otto's group walking back in the distance, and their expressions filled her with a terrible feeling. Maria quickly ran down and asked several students what had really happened. After learning Eric's location, she rushed off to find him. When she arrived, Maria found Eric in a deeply alarming state. The boy's body kept shivering violently, until he could barely speak a single word. After nearly an hour of being tortured with alternating hot and cold water, Eric's body temperature had dropped drastically. Without caring for herself, Maria worked to support Eric's nearly unconscious body. With all her strength, she brought him to a safe place so his body could warm up again. For a while, Maria stayed by Eric as he remained unconscious, occasionally wiping his body and face with great care while trying to warm him. It was then that Maria's gaze fell on Eric's back. The rows of old scars covering it left her frozen. Those scars were not the marks of school fights, but of torment that had gone on for years. Slowly, Eric finally opened his eyes. Still in Maria's arms, he began to tell her his entire past, something no one had ever known. Eric revealed that when he was only 3 years old, his mother married the man who would become his stepfather. From that moment on, his life turned into a nightmare. According to Eric, there were 2 objects his stepfather most enjoyed using to punish him: a wooden shoe and a dog chain fitted with a metal lock. And almost every day there was a new excuse to beat him. The way he sat improperly during a meal, an elbow on the table, haircut too short, coming home a few minutes late, and countless other trivial mistakes were always used as reasons for the torment. Hearing all of this, Maria was overcome with guilt, remembering how she had once decided to distance herself from Eric because she thought he resorted to violence too easily. Now Maria finally understood that Eric's entire life had been filled with violence since childhood, so his way of thinking and reacting had been shaped by trauma that ran so deep. After all the misunderstandings were resolved, their relationship returned to how it had been. In the quiet of that moment, 2 young people who loved each other could no longer hide their feelings. They held each other tightly and poured out all the affection they had held back for so long. Behind all the suffering Eric had endured, he had at least gained one thing of great worth. Eric had finally found someone who accepted him as he was and truly understood the wounds he had long kept hidden. Sadly, that happiness did not last long, because Maria had not returned to the dormitory the night before. Bridget, the manager of the girls' quarters, soon learned of her secret relationship with Eric. Stjarnsberg's rules forbade the waitresses from forming romantic relationships with students, and as a result of the violation, Maria was immediately dismissed from her job. When Tina, Maria's closest friend, learned the news, she ran after the taxi that was about to take Maria away. Full of confusion, Tina asked why all of this had to happen. Maria then explained that the dormitory manager had discovered her relationship with Eric. But she also revealed the real reason she chose to bear the entire punishment alone. Stjärnsberg was Eric's last chance to receive a proper education. For that reason, Marja had pleaded with Bridget not to report their relationship to the school. After saying goodbye to Tina, Marja boarded the taxi and left Stjärnsberg, departing without ever getting the chance to say farewell to Eric. Meanwhile, Eric was facing another problem no less heavy. Ever since his mother fled home after again becoming a victim of his stepfather's violence, Eric had been completely unable to reach her. Growing more worried, Eric tried calling home once more. But this time, the phone was answered by a police investigator. From the voices in the background, Eric could hear several other officers searching the house and gathering various pieces of evidence. Eric immediately understood that his mother had finally reported all of her husband's acts of violence to the police. His stepfather, meanwhile, had fled to avoid arrest. The officer then gave Eric a new phone number he could use to reach his mother. When the call finally connected, Eric at last heard his mother's voice, safe. After leaving home, his mother now lived elsewhere, working odd jobs to make ends meet. Full of regret, Karen finally told the police about all the torment and violence her husband had carried out over the years. She said the decision should have been made long ago. Her regret was not only because she had been a victim, but because for years she had failed to protect her son from suffering no child should ever endure. Karen apologized to Eric for failing to protect him as a mother all that time. With a voice trembling to hold back tears, Karen said everything would be all right. Their future still stretched far ahead, and she hoped Eric had now found someone who loved him. Karen knew that her years of weakness had dragged both herself and her son into a life full of suffering, but trials kept coming, one after another in Eric's life. During lunch in the school dining hall, Eric realized Marja no longer worked there. He quickly called Tina over to ask about her, and the answer he received was deeply painful. To make sure Eric could finish his education at Stjärnsberg, Marja had chosen to bear the entire punishment alone. Their relationship had been discovered by the dormitory manager, so she had been fired and quietly left the school without ever saying goodbye. Hearing this, Eric collapsed where he stood. The small light that had once brightened his life had gone out again. Eric realized the only thing he could do now was endure, finish his education, and then look for Marja once everything was over. From that day on, Eric's life changed completely. Every day he carried out the same routine. When he was not in the treatment room changing bandages and tending the wounds from the torment he had suffered, he was in the classroom studying with full focus. Eric decided to cut off all social ties with the other students. Pierre and Marja, the two people who cared about him most, had both left the school. Now there was no one left to share his story with. All of his energy and thought was directed toward a single goal, to graduate from that school. Sometime later, his effort finally paid off. In the final exams, Eric earned excellent marks. His academic achievement won direct appreciation from the headmaster, who once again saw great potential in the boy. But that happiness was again very short-lived, because when Eric returned to his dormitory room to rest, he found a letter on his bed. It turned out to have been sent by Marja sometime after she left Stjärnsberg. The envelope, however, looked as though it had been opened before, and in his excitement, Eric did not think much of it. He quickly opened the letter and began to read. Inside were 3 pages filled with expressions of love, longing, and sincere prayers from Marja. In her letter, Marja hoped Eric would be able to tell right from wrong. She also hoped he could finish his education well and live a far better life than his past. Not long after, the headmaster summoned him, and with a heavy expression, he explained that the school had made a very difficult decision. Because he had been proven to have a romantic relationship with a school servant, Eric was officially expelled from Stjärnsberg. The decision came right before his graduation, and to Eric, the punishment felt like a blow that shattered all his hopes. In that very moment, Eric realized that Marja's letter must have been read by someone before it reached him, and there was only one person who could have done something so vile, none other than Otto. With his anger having reached its peak, Eric headed straight to the stable where Otto was. All the hope he had clung to for so long had been shattered to pieces. The pain, the loss, and the hatred turned into a burning rage. This time, Eric truly intended to make Otto pay for everything he had done. He picked up a whip and prepared to use it on Otto. But something completely unexpected happened. When Eric stood before him, ready to unleash all his fury, Otto, who had always carried himself with arrogance and a sense of invincibility, suddenly knelt before him. Full of fear, the boy admitted he had done wrong and begged Eric to forgive him.
Du gör någonting mot mig. Vadå? Du ska förstöra mitt liv något mer.
Jag vet någonting!
Eric looked at his opponent for a long moment, wondering inside why Otto behaved this way. But in the end, Eric did not raise his hand to harm Otto at all. And it was in that moment that the greatest change within Eric finally took place. Eric realized that answering violence with violence would only turn him into the very thing he hated most. He would become just like his stepfather, someone who always used fear and violence to control others. Eric no longer wanted a life like that. After so much suffering, betrayal, torment, and loss, Eric finally understood that Stjernberg was a place that had long been rotten at its roots. There was nothing left for him to prove at that school. After learning that her son had been expelled from Stjernberg, Karen came at once to the school to bring Eric home. This time she did not come alone, but was accompanied by a lawyer who had agreed to help them fight for justice. The three of them went straight to the headmaster, who at that moment was preparing to end his day. Without any preamble, the lawyer explained the heart of the matter, even bringing a copy of the revised criminal code. Under the article concerning the violation of the privacy of correspondence, it was explained that anyone who deliberately opened, read, or took the contents of another person's letter without permission could face a fine or an imprisonment of up to 2 years. In other words, whoever had opened and read Maria's private letter to Eric had committed a criminal act. The case would not only drag the students involved into a police investigation, but could also stain the good name of Stjernberg and damage the reputation of the headmaster, who had long allowed various violations to occur. On top of that, the perpetrators came from prominent, highly influential families. Now the decision rested entirely with the headmaster. With a serious expression, he looked at Eric and asked what he truly wanted. In the end, to prevent a larger scandal and to save the school's reputation, the headmaster made a decision he had never dared to make before. Otto, the mastermind behind the entire chain of bullying at Stjernberg, was officially expelled from the school. The decision became a form of justice the victims had never felt before. The other student council members, who had long acted with impunity, instantly lost their nerve. They could only stand in silence, no longer able to show the arrogance they once had. Soon after, more good news arrived. Once they learned Otto had been expelled, Pierre finally decided to return to Stjernberg and continue his education. For Eric, that was one of the greatest joys after so long without his best friend. On another front, Eric also had to settle a matter that had haunted him for years. He returned to his hometown to help the police investigation against his stepfather. Before the investigators, Eric revealed all the scars covering his back. Every welt from the whippings, every cut, and every mark from the beatings became evidence that could no longer be denied. Thanks to all that evidence, the police arrested Eric's stepfather at his workplace. The man who had been so obsessed with protecting his pride and image was finally humiliated in front of all his own coworkers. At last, justice truly came. Even so, justice could never erase the wounds that had been buried for years. But there was one thing he had managed to do. Eric chose not to inherit the cruelty that had destroyed his life. He decided to carry all the wounds and scars as a part of himself, but refused to make them an excuse to keep hurting others. Sometime later, to the applause of the teachers and students, Eric finally completed his education at Stjernberg. Eric also kept in touch with Maria, exchanging letters and postcards until at last the two of them met again. His long journey, filled with violence, humiliation, loss, and betrayal, had finally reached the finish line. So the moral of the story is never trust a school where digging a hole counts as extracurricular activities.